There's something almost magical about the weight of history in your hands, especially when that history was never meant to be seen. Picture this: fragile pages, yellowed by time, their edges crumbling like secrets too long kept. These manuscripts weren't just lost to the ages, they were hidden, suppressed, or deliberately erased. And today, we're pulling back the veil on 26 of the most enigmatic texts the world was never supposed to read. Each one is a puzzle, a whispered rumor of truths too dangerous, too revolutionary, or too strange for their time. From alchemical recipes that promised immortality to prophecies that terrified emperors, these are stories that slipped through the cracks of history until now. Think about the last time you stumbled upon a secret, something small but thrilling. Maybe it was a diary tucked away in an attic or a letter forgotten in a book. Now multiply that feeling by centuries, and you'll start to understand the gravity of these manuscripts. Why would someone go to such lengths to bury a book? What could be so explosive that it had to be locked away, burned, or written in codes no one could crack? The answers are as varied as the texts themselves. Some threatened the powerful with inconvenient truths. Others held knowledge deemed too sacred or too sinister to share. And a few, well, their mysteries are so deep, we're still unraveling them today. This isn't just a journey through dusty old books. It's a detective story spanning continents and millennia, where every page holds a clue. You'll meet monks who may have bargained with the devil, astrologers who spoke to angels, and rebels who hid their descent in plain sight. You'll see how empires rose and fell because of words scribbled in secrecy, and how the faintest ink strokes can rewrite everything we thought we knew. By the time we're done, you won't just see history differently, you'll wonder how many other stories are still out there, waiting in the shadows. So let's turn the first page together and uncover what the past tried so hard to keep from us. The Voynich Manuscript isn't just a book. It's a labyrinth of ink and vellum, a puzzle that has defied every attempt to crack its secrets for over 600 years. Picture this: 240 fragile pages filled with looping, alien handwriting, accompanied by drawings of plants that don't match any known species, intricate astrological diagrams, and naked women bathing in what looks like a network of green, interconnected tubes. It's as if someone took a botanist's journal, an astronomer's notebook, and a medieval spa manual, then scrambled them together in a language no one can read. Theories about its origins are as wild as its illustrations. Some scholars insist it's a sophisticated Renaissance hoax, crafted to dupe a wealthy patron into paying for lost knowledge. Others argue it's a genuine artifact of alchemy, its coded pages hiding recipes for the philosopher's stone or elixirs of immortality. Then there are the more outlandish ideas that it's a message from another world or a surviving text from a lost civilization. Even World War II codebreakers, fresh from cracking Nazi ciphers, took one look at the Voinish and threw up their hands in defeat. What makes this manuscript truly haunting is the sense that someone wanted it to stay unreadable. The script flows too smoothly to be random gibberish, yet it follows no known linguistic pattern. The illustrations hint at a system plants grouped by imagined properties, star charts tracking unknown celestial events, but their logic remains just out of reach. Was it meant to protect dangerous knowledge, to disguise heresy, or was it the private notebook of a mind so unconventional their thoughts simply couldn't be translated into ordinary language? Recent breakthroughs have only deepened the mystery. In 2019, researchers using artificial intelligence detected possible Hebrew roots in the code, but no translator could make sense of the results. Then, in 2021, a chemist analyzing the ink found traces of compounds from the New World centuries before Columbus sailed. Each clue pulls us deeper into the enigma, proving that even in our digital age, some secrets refuse to surrender. The Voynich Manuscript isn't just a relic. It's a mirror reflecting our own obsession with the unsolvable, and a reminder that history's most tantalizing stories are often the ones written in ink we can't decipher. Imagine being the most powerful ruler in the ancient world, standing at the crossroads of history, and your next move depends on a collection of prophecies so volatile, even you fear their power. That was the dilemma Roman emperors faced with the Sibylline books, a set of oracles so influential they could declare war, approve laws, or avert disasters with a single verse. These weren't just dusty scrolls in a temple corner. They were Rome's secret weapon, consulted in moments of plague, invasion, or political turmoil. Yet by the 4th century, they vanished, deliberately burned by a general who believed their knowledge was too dangerous to leave intact. What could possibly be so explosive that even Rome's elite would rather destroy it than risk it falling into the wrong hands? The surviving fragments offer cryptic glimpses into their content. One prophecy allegedly warned of the eagle's fall, interpreted as the collapse of Rome's military might. Another spoke of a wolf among shepherds, hinting at betrayal from within the Senate. But here's the twist: these weren't passive predictions. The books were believed to shape fate, not just foresee it. When a mysterious rain of blood fell on Rome, priests scrambled to consult the Sibylline verses, ultimately staging elaborate rituals to cancel the omen. It was as if the words themselves held power, and that's exactly why they couldn't be allowed to survive. Their suppression reveals a darker truth about ancient power structures. The books were kept under lock and key in the Temple of Jupiter, accessible only to a select few priests. Emperors like Augustus famously manipulated their verses to justify his reign, cherry-picking prophecies to suit his agenda. But what happened when the prophecies turned inconvenient? One account claims the books predicted the rise of Christianity centuries before Christ, a revelation so destabilizing that later rulers may have destroyed them to erase the evidence. Whether divine warnings or political tools, their very existence threatened to undermine the empire's carefully crafted narrative. The few fragments that survived did so by accident, or perhaps design. Quotes preserved in later Christian texts suggest the Sibylline books contained echoes of monotheism, leading some scholars to speculate they were edited over time to align with shifting religious winds. Others argue the surviving pieces are forgeries planted to legitimize new regimes, but the most compelling theory: the books were never fully destroyed. Rumors persist of copies hidden in Constantinople's vaults or buried beneath the Palatine Hill, their secrets waiting for someone bold enough to unearth them. After all, in a world where knowledge is power, the most dangerous truths are the ones someone tried and failed to erase completely. Weighing in at a staggering 165 pounds and stretching nearly 3 feet in length, the Codex Gigas isn't just a book, it's a behemoth of medieval craftsmanship. Its nickname, the Devil's Bible, comes from the chilling full-page portrait of Satan himself, horns curling and skin glowing an eerie green, as if the artist had glimpsed something beyond human understanding. But here's the real shocker. Legend claims this entire manuscript, all 322 parchment pages, was penned in a single night by a desperate monk who traded his soul for supernatural help. The truth behind its creation is likely more mundane, though no less fascinating. Carbon dating suggests it took decades to complete, likely the work of an entire monastery's scriptorium. Yet the myth persists because it speaks to something deeper, our fascination with the boundaries between devotion and heresy. This isn't just a Bible, It's a paradoxical fusion of sacred and profane. Alongside the complete Latin Vulgate scripture, you'll find exorcism manuals, medical remedies involving mandrake roots and dragon blood, and even a calendar for predicting feast days. It's as if the scribes couldn't decide whether to save souls or study the occult, so they did both. That infamous devil illustration isn't even the most intriguing detail. Flip the page and you'll find a haunting contrast. A celestial city representing the heavenly Jerusalem, positioned directly opposite Satan's likeness. Was this intentional symbolism a reminder of the eternal struggle between good and evil, or something more practical, like a medieval scare tactic to keep readers on the righteous path? Scholars still debate it. What's undeniable is the Codex's strange journey through history. It survived fires, wars, and even theft by Swedish troops during the 30 Years' War. For centuries, it was kept under lock and key, as if authorities feared its contents might unleash something uncontrollable. Today, you can see it in Prague's National Library, where ultraviolet light has revealed erased notes in the margins, possibly censored passages deemed too dangerous for the average reader. Every layer of this manuscript whispers the same question. Was it meant to enlighten or to warn? The answer might depend on whether you're reading the words or the spaces between them. The Book of Soyga reads like something straight out of a wizard's forgotten library, a tangle of cryptic tables, Latin incantations, and grids of letters that seem to rearrange themselves before your eyes. At first glance, its pages look like mathematical puzzles gone rogue, but to John Dee, Queen Elizabeth I's most trusted astrologer, this was no mere curiosity. It was a sacred cipher, a direct line to divine wisdom, if only he could crack its code. Imagine the frustration of a man who conversed with angels through crystal balls, yet couldn't unravel the secrets scribbled on these yellowed pages. His obsession with the book bordered on desperation. He even petitioned the angel Uriel for help during one of his famed seances. The answer he received. The manuscript's key lay with the biblical Enoch, a figure who'd supposedly ascended to heaven millennia earlier. It was as if the book itself was taunting him. What makes the Soyga so baffling isn't just its content, but its very existence. After Dee's death in 1608, the manuscript vanished without a trace. For 400 years, historians assumed it was lost forever until two copies surfaced in the 1990s, one buried in the British Library's uncatalogued stacks, the other languishing in a private collection. How does a text that influential simply disappear? The answer might lie in its alleged power. The book's central feature is 36 magic squares, grids of letters that, when read correctly, were said to summon celestial forces. One passage warns that mispronouncing the incantations could tear the fabric of reality. Whether that's hyperbole or a genuine caution, it's easy to see why someone might have hidden it away. Modern scholars have tried to approach the Soyga with less mysticism and more methodology. Linguists note that its Latin passages are oddly structured, as if translated from another language, while its letter grids resemble Kabbalistic ciphers, yet no known Jewish mysticism of the period matches its patterns. Computer analysis in 2006 revealed some squares might be encrypted names of angels, but the overall system remains opaque, the most compelling theory. It's not a standalone text, but a missing piece of a larger esoteric tradition, like a single chapter ripped from an invisible encyclopedia of the supernatural. The book's sudden reappearance raises darker questions. Why now? Was its rediscovery accidental, or did someone or something allow it to be found? The timing is peculiar. The late 20th century saw a surge in occult interest, from best-selling novels about secret histories to declassified government experiments in remote viewing. Whether coincidence or design, the Soyga's return feels like a whisper from the past, reminding us that some mysteries refuse to stay buried. And if John Dee, with all his celestial connections, couldn't unlock its meaning, what chance do the rest of us have? Perhaps that's the point. Some doors aren't meant to be opened, only noticed, waiting in the shadows. Gold that flows like liquid, trees that bear metallic fruit, and a substance capable of turning lead into treasure. These are just a few of the fantastical images crammed into the Ripley scrolls. At first glance, they look like medieval comic strips for alchemists, a riot of dragons, kings, and swirling symbols. But to those who studied them in secret, these 15-foot-long illustrated manuscripts were nothing less than a roadmap to the Philosopher's Stone, the legendary substance said to grant eternal life and infinite wealth. Named after Sir George Ripley, a 15th-century monk and alchemist whose own life was shrouded in mystery, the scrolls were never meant for public eyes. Copies were passed hand to hand among initiates, their cryptic diagrams decoded only by those deemed worthy. What makes these scrolls so fascinating isn't just their whimsical artwork, it's the way they straddle the line between literal instruction and profound metaphor. Take the central image found in many versions, a serpent devouring its own tail, encircling a sun and moon. To some, this was a technical diagram outlining the chemical process of distillation needed to purify the prima materia, the base substance of creation. To others, it represented the cyclical nature of life and death, a spiritual allegory for the alchemist's own transformation. Even the colors hold double meanings. A red king and white queen locked in embrace might symbolize the fusion of sulfur and mercury, key ingredients in alchemical theory, or they could depict the union of opposing cosmic forces. The secrecy surrounding the scrolls wasn't just theatrical. In Ripley's time, alchemy was a dangerous pursuit. Claiming you could manufacture gold was tantamount to treason, threatening the very foundations of medieval economies. Yet the scrolls survived, often tucked away in the libraries of kings and popes who publicly condemned alchemy while privately funding its practitioners. This duality hints at their true purpose. Some historians argue they were less about chemistry and more about power-coded political manifestos disguised as mystical nonsense. The stone might have represented not a physical object, but the elusive knowledge needed to upend social hierarchies. Modern science has only deepened the enigma. Researchers analyzing the pigments found traces of rare metals like orpiment and vermilion, materials alchemists believed held transformative properties. More intriguingly, some illustrations align with real chemical reactions. The green lion devouring the sun mirrors the process of dissolving gold with acid. Were the scrolls actually encoding advanced metallurgical techniques behind their fantastical veneer, or were they, as skeptics suggest, an elaborate inside joke among intellectuals, a way to mock those who took the quest for the stone too seriously? Perhaps the most compelling clue lies in Ripley's own words. In his poem, The Compound of Alchemy, he warns that the true secret lieth not in many books. The scrolls, then, might be less a recipe and more a riddle, a test to separate the gullible from the genuinely enlightened. After all, if you couldn't see past the dragons and dancing skeletons, you'd never grasp the real message hidden in plain sight. And that's the genius of these manuscripts. They force us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the most profound knowledge isn't in the answers, but in learning how to ask the right questions. Buried in the archives of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences lies a book that defies every rule of language. The Rohonc Codex doesn't just resist translation, it mocks the very idea of being understood. Its 448 pages are crammed with 200 symbols unlike any known alphabet. arranged in tight rows that look more like musical notation than words. To add to the confusion, nearly every page is illustrated with scenes that blend Christianity, Hinduism, and something entirely invented. Crucifixions next to elephant-headed deities, soldiers in Ottoman turbans sharing space with what might be Viking runes. It's as if someone took a dozen world religions, threw them in a blender, and then wrote a holy book in a language that never existed. The Codex first surfaced in the early 19th century, donated anonymously to the Academy with a note claiming it originated in medieval Wallachia. But radiocarbon dating tells a different story. The vellum pages trace back to the 1500s, while the ink suggests an even later origin. This discrepancy fuels the fiercest debate among scholars. Is it a genuine artifact of a lost culture, or an elaborate 19th century hoax? The illustrations hold clues, but they're maddeningly contradictory. Some scenes clearly depict New Testament moments like the Last Supper, yet the figures wear clothing from the Renaissance. Others show bizarre rituals, like a man praying before a floating cube covered in eyes, straight out of a fever dream. Attempts to crack the code have led to wild theories. One linguist proposed it was written in a distorted form of Old Hungarian, while another insisted the symbols were a cipher for Dacian, the extinct language of ancient Romania. In 2012, a team claimed to find patterns matching the structure of Sanskrit, only to realize the same patterns appeared in nonsense texts they generated as a control. The most compelling breakthrough came from a physicist who noticed the symbol frequencies matched those of a syllabic system like Japanese kana, but when applied, this only produced gibberish. It's as if the codex was designed to lead decoders down endless false trails. What truly chills historians is the possibility that this isn't a code at all. Some argue the Rohonc Codex represents glossolalia, speaking in tongues, made physical. Religious movements throughout history, from the Montanists to the Shakers, believed divine messages could bypass human language entirely. If so, the manuscript might be the work of a mystic channeling what they believed was celestial speech, never meant to be read by mortal eyes. Others suggest it's the remnant of a secret society, its imagery blending multiple faiths to avoid persecution during Europe's wars of religion. Then there's the paper trail, or rather, the lack of one. Unlike the Voynich Manuscript, which has a documented history, the Rohonc Codex appears out of nowhere in 1838. The only record is a letter from a count who claimed it was found in a chest in his attic, wrapped in a cloak embroidered with pentagrams. That cloak vanished, leaving no evidence to verify his story. Was this a deliberate act of misdirection, a wealthy nobleman's prank, or proof that some truths are so dangerous they come pre-packaged with their own oblivion? The Codex's greatest trick might be the way it reflects our own obsessions. Every generation projects its own fears onto it. Cold War scholars saw Soviet disinformation, while modern conspiracy theorists whisper about time travelers or alien visitors. But perhaps the real mystery isn't the text itself, but why we're so desperate to believe it holds answers. In an age where AI can decode ancient scripts and satellites map lost cities, the Rohonc Codex remains a stubborn blank spot, a reminder that some doors, no matter how hard we knock, refuse to open. And maybe that's exactly how its creator wanted it. The Treatise of the Vessels reads like a divine scavenger hunt, one where the prize isn't just gold or jewels, but fragments of cosmic power itself. This cryptic Kabbalistic text claims to document the fate of 32 sacred vessels from Solomon's temple, each one imbued with divine energy and hidden away before the Babylonian conquest. But here's where the mystery deepens. Are these vessels physical objects buried in caves and riverbeds, or are they metaphors for spiritual forces scattered across the universe? The text itself seems to play both sides, describing locations with startling precision while also warning that only the pure of heart may perceive their true nature. Historical records suggest the treatise circulated in whispers among medieval Jewish mystics, never formally published for fear its revelations might fall into unworthy hands. One passage describes a golden menorah concealed beneath the foundation stone of creation, a phrase that could refer to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem or the metaphysical bedrock of existence. Another speaks of a sapphire tablet hidden in the River of Fire, a term that appears in both Babylonian geography and Kabbalistic visions of the divine throne. This deliberate ambiguity is the text's genius. It invites interpretation while resisting certainty, like a mirror reflecting whatever the reader brings to it. Modern treasure hunters haven't been deterred by the philosophical haze. In 1988, an expedition combed the Kidron Valley near Jerusalem armed with ground-penetrating radar, convinced a passage about vessels beneath the olive press pointed to literal underground chambers. They found nothing but ancient sewage tunnels, yet scholars of mysticism argue they missed the point entirely. In Kabbalah, the olive press symbolizes the crushing of ego necessary for enlightenment, suggesting the real treasure was internal transformation all along. The treatise's most tantalizing section describes the vessel of voices, said to contain the original names of God. According to legend, whoever possesses it can command the very fabric of reality. Some Hasidic traditions claim this vessel wasn't hidden at all but shattered, its fragments embedded in human souls, explaining why certain individuals throughout history displayed miraculous abilities. This idea echoes through other esoteric traditions, from Gnosticism to Sufism, as if the treatise is tapping into a universal archetype of lost divine connection. Perhaps the most compelling evidence for the text's power lies in its survival. Unlike other Kabbalistic works that were systematically destroyed during anti-Jewish persecutions, the treatise of the vessels always resurfaced, often in improbable ways. A copy turned up in 16th century Prague, sewn into the lining of a Torah scroll rescued from a burning synagogue. Another appeared in 20th century New York, sold at a flea market between a cookbook and a stack of postcards. Its persistence suggests something beyond mere chance, as if the text itself refuses to disappear until its message is fully understood. The real lesson of the treatise may lie in its refusal to be categorized. Like the vessels it describes, the manuscript exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously: a historical document, a spiritual guide, and a riddle wrapped in a paradox. Whether its treasures are earthly or ethereal, one thing is certain: the act of seeking them changes the seeker, and isn't that the mark of truly powerful knowledge? Not that it gives answers, but that it compels us to ask better questions. The Ora Linda book erupts into history like a thunderclap from an alternate past, a leather-bound manuscript claiming to rewrite everything we thought we knew about ancient Europe. Discovered in the 19th century, this Frisian text describes a sophisticated civilization ruled by priestesses, where women navigated trade routes, governed cities, and preserved wisdom in sacred scripts. According to its pages, this wasn't some mythical utopia, but a real society flourishing over 4,000 years ago, its matriarchal traditions stretching from the North Sea to the Mediterranean. But here's where things get messy. Nearly every academic dismissed it as an elaborate forgery the moment it surfaced. The question isn't just whether the book is genuine, it's why the idea of a female-dominated ancient world proved so threatening to the historians of its time. Provenance alone makes the Ora Linda book suspect. It first appeared in 1867, handed to a Dutch librarian by a man named Cornelis over de Linden, who claimed it had been passed down through his family for generations. The manuscript's materials, a mix of calfskin and homemade ink, initially seemed plausible for an ancient text, but linguistic analysis revealed bizarre inconsistencies. While written in a form of Old Frisian, it included grammatical structures and words unattested in any other surviving documents from the period. Some phrases even bore eerie resemblances to 19th century feminist literature, as if someone had retrofitted modern ideals onto an imagined past. Yet dismissing it as a simple hoax overlooks its unsettling power. The book's depiction of a society where inheritance passed through maternal lines and priestesses interpreted celestial omens directly challenged Victorian-era gender norms. Critics pounced on anachronisms like references to paper in a supposedly Bronze Age text, but rarely addressed its core provocation. What if history wasn't always written by the winners, but by those who erased the winners they found inconvenient? Even if forged, the Aura Linda book forces us to confront why the very idea of matriarchal prehistory triggers such visceral skepticism. After all, archaeological finds like the Neolithic Venus figurines or Çatalhöyük's egalitarian city layouts hint that female-centric societies might not be purely fictional. The manuscript's most explosive claim centers on a catastrophic flood around 2190 BCE, decimating the Frisian homeland and scattering survivors across Europe. This event, dubbed the Aldland disaster, suspiciously mirrors Plato's account of Atlantis, but with one radical twist. Here, the advanced civilization isn't a militaristic empire, but a maritime confederacy led by councilwomen called folk mothers. Could a 19th century forger have concocted such a narrative, or was the book tapping into oral traditions suppressed by later patriarchal cultures? The answer might lie in its reception. When German Nazis later appropriated the text, cherry-picking its Aryan imagery while ignoring its feminist themes, they demonstrated how easily alternative histories can be twisted to serve dominant ideologies. What gives the Aura Linda book lingering resonance isn't its authenticity, but its uncanny ability to expose historical fault lines. Every generation projects its anxieties onto it. 19th century scholars saw a threat to biblical timelines, 20th century feminists hailed it as proof of suppressed goddess worship, and today's conspiracy theorists claim it predicts climate catastrophes. The manuscript's real secret might be how it holds up a mirror to whatever society encounters it, revealing more about our own biases than any ancient truth. Perhaps that's why it remains taboo in academic circles, not because it's false, but because it asks uncomfortable questions about who gets to decide what's true. In a world where history is written by the powerful, the most dangerous stories aren't necessarily forgeries. They're the ones that challenge who holds the pen. Imagine a medieval monk, quill in hand, carefully scraping away the ink of a 1,000-year-old manuscript to make room for his own prayers. What he didn't realize, what he couldn't have known, was that beneath his knife strokes lay some of the most brilliant mathematical discoveries of antiquity, erased to make space for yet another copy of the Psalms. This is the tragedy and the miracle of the Archimedes Palimpsest, a book that embodies the razor-thin line between preservation and oblivion. The story begins in 10th century Constantinople, where an anonymous scribe took a battered volume of Archimedes' works, already 7 centuries old at that point, and scrubbed its pages clean. Parchment was expensive, and to the scribe's eyes, these diagrams of spheres and cylinders were just obsolete clutter. Over the erased text, he penned a liturgical book, layering sacred words atop secular genius. For nearly 800 years, no one suspected the truth. Then, in 1906, a Danish philologist examining the prayer book noticed faint geometric shapes bleeding through the prayers. Under ultraviolet light, the ghostly traces of Archimedes' original writing emerged like whispers from the grave. What was nearly lost reads like a manifesto of scientific rebellion. The palimpsest contained the only known copies of the method of mechanical theorems, where Archimedes describes using infinitesimals to calculate volumes, a concept so ahead of its time, it wouldn't be formally rediscovered until calculus emerged in the 17th century. Another treatise, Stomachion, reveals the ancient Greek grappling with combinatorics, exploring how 14 geometric pieces can be rearranged into a square over 17,000 ways. These weren't just math exercises, they were flashes of insight that could have accelerated human progress by millennia if they'd survived intact. The palimpsest's survival hinged on a series of near misses. In the 1200s, Crusaders sacked Constantinople, scattering its libraries. In the 1920s, a forger painted gilded evangelist portraits over the recovered pages, further obscuring the text. Even modern technology struggled to resurrect it. Teams of scientists spent over a decade using multispectral imaging to tease apart the layers of ink, pigment, and glue. Each revelation came at a cost. One page, when exposed to X-rays, literally crumbled to dust. This manuscript forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the fragility of knowledge. How many other works by Archimedes, or his peers like Hypatia or Eratosthenes, vanished because they were deemed less valuable than religious texts? The irony is crushing. The very monasteries that preserved classical works often did so by destroying them. Yet the palimpsest also offers hope. Its recovery proves that even when knowledge is suppressed, overwritten, or forgotten, traces remain. The past never fully disappears, it just waits for the right tools, the right minds to bring it back into the light. Perhaps the most haunting lesson lies in the margins. Amid Archimedes' precise calculations, researchers found 11th century shopping lists and children's doodles, proof that even the greatest ideas were once someone's mundane reality. Genius isn't always recognized in its time. Sometimes it's scraped away to make room for groceries, only to resurface centuries later, reminding us that progress isn't a straight line, but a palimpsest, layer upon layer of trial, error, and occasional brilliance. For centuries, Judas Iscariot's name has been synonymous with betrayal, the ultimate villain in Christianity's foundational story. But what if everything we've been taught is wrong? The Gospel of Judas, a fragile papyrus codex hidden in an Egyptian cave for nearly 2,000 years, flips the script entirely. In this startling text, Judas isn't the greedy betrayer of legend. He's the only disciple who truly understood Jesus' mission, handpicked to fulfill a divine plan by facilitating the crucifixion. Discovered in the 1970s but not fully translated until 2006, this gospel paints a portrait so radical, early church fathers tried to erase it from history. The manuscript's survival is nothing short of miraculous. Copied in the 3rd or 4th century but likely based on older traditions, it was preserved by the dry desert air, tucked away by Gnostics, a mystical branch of Christianity declared heretical by the Orthodox Church. Unlike the New Testament Gospels, where Judas acts out of malice or greed, here Jesus takes him aside and whispers secrets no other human shall know. Their relationship reads more like conspiratorial allies than enemies, with Jesus even telling Judas, "You will exceed all of them, for you will sacrifice the man that clothes me." This chilling line suggests Judas wasn't a traitor, but the ultimate insider, helping Jesus shed his physical form to return to the divine realm. Why would such a provocative narrative emerge in the first place? The answer lies in the fierce ideological battles of early Christianity. The Gnostics viewed the material world as a flawed creation, something to escape through secret knowledge or gnosis. In their eyes, Judas' act wasn't sinful. It was the key to liberation, freeing Christ's spirit from its earthly prison. This directly contradicted mainstream Christian teachings about redemption through Jesus' suffering. making the Gospel of Judas dangerous to church authority. By the 4th century, bishops like Irenaeus were actively condemning such texts, ordering them destroyed as fictitious legends. The rediscovery of this gospel in modern times sent shockwaves through theological circles. Carbon dating confirmed its antiquity, while linguistic analysis showed it wasn't a later forgery but a genuine product of early Christian diversity. Suddenly, scholars had to grapple with hard questions. How many other alternative Christianities flourished before being stamped out? What does it mean that Judas Christianity's great villain might have been reinterpreted as a tragic hero, even a saint, in some communities? The implications ripple beyond religion into our very understanding of history's winners and losers. After all, history is written by the powerful, and the Gospel of Judas is a stark reminder that the truth we inherit is often just the version that survived. Perhaps the most poignant detail lies in the manuscript's physical state. When researchers first unrolled the brittle papyrus, they found entire sections eaten by insects or reduced to fragments. It's as if the text itself mirrors the story it tells, a revelation fragmented by time, gnawed at by forces trying to silence it. Yet, like Judas in its pages, what was meant to be erased instead became a catalyst for deeper understanding. The Gospel's survival forces us to confront an uncomfortable idea. Sometimes the greatest betrayals aren't acts of treachery, but of forgetting, and the most revolutionary truths are the ones someone tried hardest to burn. The Emerald Tablet of Hermes isn't just a text, it's a riddle wrapped in 7 layers of enigma, a single page of cryptic prose that somehow became the Rosetta Stone of alchemy. Imagine holding a document so potent that medieval scholars believed deciphering it could unlock the secrets of transmutation, eternal life, and the very fabric of reality. Yet here's the paradox: while its influence echoes through centuries of esoteric thought, the original tablet has never been found. We know it only through fragments quoted in Arabic manuscripts, Renaissance commentaries, and the fevered notebooks of alchemists who devoted their lives to unpacking its 14 lines of text. At its heart lies the infamous axiom, "As above, so below." This deceptively simple phrase has been interpreted as everything from a cosmic blueprint, suggesting the microcosm of Earth mirrors the macrocosm of the heavens, to a practical guide for chemical processes, where reactions in a flask echo celestial patterns. But the tablet's genius lies in its refusal to be pinned down. One alchemist might see it as a spiritual manifesto, another as a coded recipe for creating the Philosopher's Stone. Isaac Newton himself copied it by hand, scribbling frantic marginalia as he tried to reconcile its mysteries with his groundbreaking physics. Why has such a pivotal text survived only in whispers? The answer may lie in its dangerous potency. Unlike other manuscripts suppressed by religious or political authorities, the Emerald Tablet seems to have self-erased, its original version possibly destroyed by those who feared its knowledge. Medieval Arabic sources claim it was discovered in a cave, clutched in the hands of Hermes Trismegistus, the mythical sage who straddled the line between God and man. But even this could be allegory. The cave might represent hidden wisdom, and Hermes a symbolic fusion of Egyptian Thoth and Greek Hermes, bridging ancient traditions. The tablet's physical absence hasn't dulled its power. In fact, its fragmentary nature seems to amplify it. Each generation projects its own obsessions onto those 14 lines. Jungian psychologists see archetypes of universal consciousness, while modern physicists marvel at how that which is below corresponds to that which is above, mirrors holographic universe theories. Even Silicon Valley tech gurus have co-opted its phrases, twisting them into mantras about the interconnectedness of data. Perhaps the tablet's greatest trick is how it turns seekers into mirrors. Newton sought divine geometry in its words, while rogue chemists like Nicholas Flamel allegedly used it to manufacture gold. Neither approach was wrong. The tablet thrives on multiplicity, offering no answers but infinite ways to question. That's why it was never formally published, not because it was suppressed, but because its true form isn't ink on vellum. It's the spark of recognition when a reader suddenly sees their own reflection in the words, realizing the secret was never hidden in the text at all, but in the act of seeking itself. And isn't that the most powerful alchemy of all? Of all the treasures that survived the Spanish conquest of the Americas, the Dresden Codex is perhaps the most miraculous, a vibrant, accordion-folded book of bark paper, its pages painted in vivid blues and reds, filled with numbers and gods dancing across the cosmos. While thousands of Mayan manuscripts went up in flames during the 16th century, deemed works of the devil by friars like Diego de Landa, this single codex slipped through the cracks of history. Its survival feels almost intentional, as if the gods themselves intervened to preserve a fragment of Mesoamerica's intellectual grandeur. What makes the Dresden Codex extraordinary isn't just its rarity, but the sophistication of its content. Modern astronomers have confirmed its calculations of Venus's orbit are accurate to within a single day over 500 years. It contains eclipse tables predicting lunar events centuries in advance and intricate charts mapping the movements of Mars and Mercury, all achieved without telescopes or written numerals, using only dots, bars, and the mesmerizing gaze of priest astronomers who tracked the heavens from pyramid observatories. One section even details a zodiac of its own, correlating celestial events with agricultural cycles and sacred rituals. This wasn't just a scientific manual. It was a bridge between the earthly and divine, a testament to how the Maya wove mathematics into the very fabric of their spirituality. The Codex's journey to survival reads like a historical thriller. After somehow escaping the bonfires of the Spanish Inquisition, it resurfaced in Vienna in the 18th century, tucked away in the private collection of a nobleman who likely had no idea of its significance. By the time it reached the Royal Library of Dresden, hence its name, scholars were only beginning to decipher Mayan glyphs. Today, we know it originated in the Yucatan around the 11th or 12th century, making it the oldest surviving book from the Americas. But the real mystery is how it endured. Some speculate it was smuggled out by a sympathetic friar or hidden in a sealed cave. Others argue its sheer beauty may have spared it. Even conquistadors couldn't resist its illuminated pages, repurposing it as a curiosity rather than kindling. Perhaps the most haunting revelation lies in its prophecies. The Codex contains a section modern researchers call the Serpent Series, a sequence of dates and imagery depicting catastrophes, floods, droughts, and celestial omens. Some interpret these as warnings of cyclical destruction, tied to the Mayas' belief in repeating epochs. Chillingly, one passage correlates with the years of the Spanish arrival, as if the scribes had foreseen their civilization's collapse. Yet the Codex itself defies that collapse. Its very existence is a rebellion against erasure, a whisper from a world that refused to be silenced. The Dresden Codex forces us to confront a painful irony. The same culture that produced this masterpiece of astronomy was labeled primitive by those who burned its libraries. Its survival is a reminder that history is written by the victors, but sometimes, just sometimes, the vanquished leave behind a fragment so luminous it outshines the flames meant to consume it. And in those glowing pages, we catch a glimpse of the minds who mapped the stars long before Europe dreamed of the scientific revolution. The Liber Lintius presents one of archaeology's most delightful contradictions, an Egyptian mummy meticulously prepared for the afterlife, swaddled not in hieroglyphic spells but in linen strips covered in Etruscan script. This 6th century BC text, the longest surviving Etruscan document, wasn't discovered in Italy where the civilization flourished, but tucked away in a sarcophagus in Alexandria. The irony is almost poetic, a language that scholars still struggle to fully decipher, preserved not by its own people but by an entirely unrelated culture obsessed with eternal preservation. How this sacred text ended up repurposed as mummy wrappings is a puzzle wrapped in layers of trade, war, and sheer happenstance. The Etruscans, who dominated central Italy before Rome's rise, were renowned merchants and seafarers, trading amber, wine, and bronze goods across the Mediterranean. Their ships likely reached Egypt's bustling ports where linen, a prized Egyptian export, was exchanged for Etruscan goods. But here's where the story twists. The Liber Lintius isn't a mundane trade ledger. Its repetitive invocations to gods like Catha and Usul suggest it was a liturgical calendar or ritual guide, perhaps even a temple's sacred text. Why would such a spiritually significant object be cut into strips and sold as packaging material? One theory points to crisis. By the 3rd century BC, Rome's expansion had crushed Etruscan independence, and their language began fading. A displaced priest or noble, fleeing the upheaval, might have carried the scroll to Alexandria as a relic of their dying culture, only for it to be discarded or seized by merchants unaware of its importance. Alternatively, the text could have been captured as war loot during Rome's conquests, shipped to Egypt as curiosity, and later repurposed by pragmatic embalmers who saw only high-quality linen, not the prayers woven into its fibers. The mummy itself adds another layer of intrigue. When Croatian archaeologist Mihajlo Baric purchased the artifact in the 19th century, he assumed it was a typical Egyptian burial. Only years later did scholars notice the faint script beneath the resin. The deceased, a woman in her 30s, remains anonymous, her name lost to time even as the foreign words meant to guide other souls to the afterlife now cradle hers. This accidental fusion of cultures raises profound questions about how knowledge survives. The Etruscans, who influenced Rome's early religion and architecture, left almost no written records intact. Their literature, laws, and histories were erased except for this single text, saved by the very people who couldn't read it. Modern technology has teased out further secrets. Multispectral imaging revealed the linen's original folds, suggesting the Liber Lintius was once a scroll nearly 10 feet long before being sliced into bandages. Linguists have identified sections detailing lunar festivals and offerings, giving rare insight into Etruscan spirituality. Yet the text resists full translation, its grammar and vocabulary still partially opaque. In a way, its journey mirrors the Etruscan language itself, fragmented, repurposed, but stubbornly enduring. What makes the Liber Lintius unforgettable isn't just its odd survival, but what it reveals about the interconnected ancient world. A prayer whispered in an Etruscan temple might end up echoing through an Egyptian tomb. A civilization's sacred text becomes another's commodity, then transforms again into a museum artifact, bridging 3 millennia. It's a reminder that history isn't a straight line but a tangled web, where even the most ordinary objects, a roll of linen, a merchant's cargo, can become time capsules carrying whispers of lost worlds into the future. The Popol isn't just a book, it's a defiant act of cultural survival, a sacred Mayan text that refused to disappear even as Spanish conquistadors burned libraries and shattered temples. Picture this, in the mid-16th century, as Franciscan friars torched thousands of indigenous manuscripts in their crusade against pagan idolatry, an anonymous Kayich Maya elder secretly transcribed their most precious creation story into Latin script, using the alphabet of their oppressors to preserve the voice of their ancestors. This act of quiet rebellion would become our only surviving copy of the Maya's cosmic Genesis myth, a vibrant tapestry of gods, heroes, and the sacred origins of corn and humanity itself. What makes the Popol Vuh so extraordinary is how it straddles two worlds. On one level, it reads like a Mesoamerican Bible beginning with the stirring words. This is the account of when all was still silent, when only the sky and the sea existed. It chronicles the hero twins' descent into the underworld, their ball games with death gods, and the eventual dawn of the first true humans molded from maize. Yet beneath this epic narrative lies a coded resistance. The text was transcribed by a Dominican friar named Francisco Ximenes in the early 18th century, who claimed he wanted to study indigenous beliefs to better convert them. Ironically, his transcription became the very vehicle that preserved Mayan spirituality for future generations. The manuscript's survival hinged on a series of near miracles. After Ximenes's death, it languished in a Guatemalan monastery until the 19th century, when it was smuggled out during political upheavals. At one point, it nearly became kindling for a cookfire before a librarian recognized its value. Today, it sits in Chicago's Newberry Library, a fragile relic that scholars are still deciphering not just for its mythological content, but for the subtle ways it critiques colonialism. Take the famous Council of Gods passage, where deities debate whether humans should be allowed knowledge. To some modern Maya activists, this isn't just ancient lore. It's a parable about the Spanish destruction of their books and the enduring fight for intellectual sovereignty. What chills historians is how much was lost alongside it. Diego de Landa, the Franciscan bishop who orchestrated the mass burning of Mayan codices in 1562, boasted in his memoirs that he destroyed 27 scrolls of painted hieroglyphs. Those scrolls likely contained everything from medicinal botany to astronomical tables, entire encyclopedias of knowledge gone in a single afternoon. The Popol Vuh's survival forces us to confront a haunting question: how many other creation stories, scientific insights, or philosophical traditions vanished without a trace? The Aztecs' Amixcali House of Books in Tenochtitlan held thousands of codices, only 15 survive, yet the Popol Vuh's legacy transcends its pages. In modern Guatemala, Maya communities have reclaimed it as a living text, performing its stories through dance and oral tradition. Scholars have found parallels between its myths and ancient glyphs at ruins like Quirigá, proving its roots stretch back over 2 millennia. Most poignantly, it's inspired a movement to revive Mayan writing systems once banned by colonial rulers. The very act of teenagers learning to read their ancestors' glyphs from the Popol Vuh's verses is a twist of fate its original scribes could never have imagined. Proof that some stories are so powerful, not even fire can silence them. The real lesson of the Popol Vuh isn't just about loss, but about the unexpected ways knowledge endures. It reminds us that history's victors don't always get the final word. Sometimes, a single copied manuscript, hidden in a friar's desk or passed hand to hand through generations, can outlast empires. And in its maze-made heroes and underworld ball games, we find a truth more precious than any artifact. Cultures don't disappear when their temples fall. They go underground like seeds waiting for the right moment to rise again. The Hypnerotomachia polyphily is like a Renaissance fever dream, a book so lavishly bizarre that even its title defies straightforward translation. Roughly meaning Polyphilo's strife of love in a dream, this 1592 masterpiece blends architectural blueprints, cryptic word puzzles, and sensual allegories into a single, dizzying narrative. Imagine stumbling upon a book where every page alternates between intricate woodcut illustrations of fantastical buildings, lovers entwined in gardens, and dense blocks of text written in a mashup of Latin, Greek, Italian, and invented languages. It's as if the author took a medieval romance, an architect's sketchbook, and a secret society's cipher, then bound them together with gold leaf and sheer audacity. What makes this book truly enigmatic is its authorship, or rather, the deliberate lack thereof. The only clue lies in the first letters of each chapter, which spell out, Brother Francesco Colonna deeply loved Polia. But was Colonna the author, or was this a red herring? Some scholars argue the text's sophistication points to luminaries like Leon Battista Alberti, or even the young Leonardo da Vinci. Others believe the name is a joke, a pun on the Roman Colosseum, echoing the book's obsession with ruins and rebirth. The mystery deepens when you consider the publisher, Aldus Manutius, a trailblazer who rarely worked with anonymous text. Why break protocol for this one? Then there's the content itself, a labyrinth of double meanings. On the surface, it follows Polyphilo's quest for his beloved Polia through surreal landscapes dotted with obelisks, fountains, and crumbling temples. But every detail feels loaded with symbolism. A broken column might represent lost knowledge, while a fountain's spiral design could mirror the path to enlightenment. Even the typography plays tricks. Words curve into shapes, letters hide within letters, and passages read differently backward. It's a book that doesn't just want to be read, it demands to be decoded. The erotic undercurrents only thicken the plot. Scenes of Polyphilo and Polia embracing are intercut with architectural diagrams where columns and arches take on unmistakably sensual forms. To some, this is high-minded Neoplatonism, love as a metaphor for divine harmony. To others, it's a cheeky subversion of Renaissance prudery, hiding scandalous ideas behind a facade of respectability. The most tantalizing theory, that the book is a thinly veiled allegory for the alchemical, sacred marriage, where physical union symbolizes the fusion of opposing cosmic forces. Modern readers might miss the full shock value, but in its time, the Hypnerotomachia was revolutionary. It was among the first books to integrate images and text as equals, influencing everything from emblem books to modern graphic design. Yet for all its innovation, it nearly faded into obscurity. Copies were hoarded by collectors, and its reputation as an unreadable oddity kept it out of mainstream scholarship. Only in the 20th century did historians and artists rediscover its genius, from surrealists drawn to its dream logic to architects marveling at its imaginary cities. The book's ultimate secret might lie in its refusal to be categorized. Is it a love story, a puzzle, a manifesto? Perhaps it's all these things or none. Like the ruins Polyphilo wanders through, the text invites us to project meaning onto its fragments, reminding us that the most enduring mysteries aren't those with answers, but those that keep us questioning. And in that sense, the Hypnerotomachia Polyphili isn't just a book. It's a mirror, reflecting back whatever the reader brings to it, whether obsession, frustration, or awe. The Smithfield Decretal should be a dry, bureaucratic tome, a 13th century collection of papal decrees meant to guide ecclesiastical law. Instead, tucked between solemn Latin paragraphs, you'll find one of medieval art's most surreal surprises: rabbits in judges' robes sentencing humans to death, foxes preaching to geese, and armored snails battling knights. This isn't just marginal doodling, it's a full-blown anthropomorphic revolt sprawling across the parchment, where the usual hierarchy of man over beast gets gleefully upended. Why would a scribe risk decorating a sacred legal text with such irreverent chaos? The answer might lie in the razor-sharp edge of medieval satire. Look closely at one infamous miniature, a rabbit sheriff, sword at his hip, leading a shackled human to the gallows while a jury of rabbits watches sternly. The scene mirrors real-life executions of the period, except here, the oppressed become the oppressors, To modern eyes, it feels like a cartoon, but in a society where peasant revolts were brutally crushed, this was dangerously subversive symbolism. Some historians interpret these bunnies gone bad as a jab at corrupt authorities, using animals to mock human failings without directly accusing powerful figures. After all, a nobleman might chuckle at a rabbit judge before realizing he's the butt of the joke. Yet there's another layer to this furry rebellion. Medieval manuscripts often featured drolleries, whimsical creatures in the margins, but the Smithfield decretals take it further. The animals don't just frolic, they enact elaborate parodies of human justice. In one scene, a rabbit drags a bloodhound to court, flipping the natural order where dogs hunt rabbits. Elsewhere, a snail, armored like a knight, jousts with a man who flees in terror. These aren't random absurdities, they're carefully crafted inversions, questioning who really holds power in a world where the strong dominate the weak. The scribe's audacity is even more striking when you consider the context. The decretals were created during the reign of Edward II, a king notorious for favoring his nobles hunting rights over peasants' livelihoods. Rabbits, specifically, were a loaded symbol royal game reserved for the elite, with poachers facing mutilation or death. By casting rabbits as executioners, the artist might have been covertly siding with the oppressed, turning legal parchment into protest art. What's truly remarkable is how these images slipped past scrutiny. Unlike overt heresy, which could get a scribe burned, playful marginalia occupied a gray area. The church tolerated them as foolish diversions, underestimating their potency. That misjudgment allowed subversion to flourish in plain sight, proving that even the most rigid systems have cracks where dissent can seep through. The decretals bunnies aren't just medieval memes, they're a masterclass in how the powerless can critique power, armed with nothing but wit and a well-placed ink blot. Centuries later, their legacy echoes in political cartoons and satirical street art. The manuscript reminds us that humor, however absurd, has always been a weapon against tyranny, one that can hide in the margins until the right reader spots it and laughs or revolts. The Prodigerum AC Ostentorum Chronicon reads like a Renaissance-era X-Files casebook, a sprawling, leather-bound volume where comets streak across the sky like divine warning signs, two-headed calves symbolize impending doom, and rains of blood herald the apocalypse. Compiled in 1557 by Conrad Lycosthenes, this bizarre encyclopedia catalogues over 1,000 supernatural events spanning from ancient Rome to the author's own turbulent era. But here's what makes it truly fascinating. Lycosthenes wasn't some backwoods mystic scribbling by candlelight. He was a respected humanist scholar, a protege of the great Erasmus, working in the intellectual epicenter of Basel's printing houses. Why would a man of letters devote years to documenting what most modern readers would dismiss as medieval superstition? The answer lies in the razor's edge between emerging science and vanishing medieval worldviews. Flip through its pages and you'll find meticulous woodcuts of celestial phenomena alongside birth defects interpreted as omens. A column of fire over Constantinople in 593. Divine Judgment, a baby born with translucent skin in 1522, a portent of political upheaval. Lycosthenes organized these events chronologically, implying a pattern, as if history itself pulsed with supernatural warnings humanity kept ignoring. What's startling isn't just his credulity, but his methodology. He cross-referenced classical authors like Livy and Pliny with contemporary broadsheets, treating folkloric accounts with the same scrutiny as eclipse records. In an age before the scientific method, this was cutting-edge research, an attempt to systematize the inexplicable. The book's limited circulation speaks volumes about its dangerous straddle of eras. While the Protestant Reformation raged, Lycosthenes' work was too pious for radical reformers who rejected medieval superstitions, yet too mystical for emerging empiricists. Even his publisher balked at the project's scope, forcing Lycosthenes to finance part of the print run himself. The few copies that survived were often heavily annotated, some readers adding their own local omens, others angrily scribbling fabula. Fable in the margins, this tension mirrors the 16th century's broader identity crisis, where the pull of rational inquiry clashed with a deep-seated belief that the universe was alive with divine messages. Modern readers might dismiss the Chronicon as quaint paranoia, but that misses its revolutionary subtext. By cataloging anomalies, Lycosthenes was inadvertently laying groundwork for disciplines like meteorology and teratology. His description of a tornado in 1556 matches modern meteorological models, while his records of monstrous births now read as early documentation of genetic disorders. The line between omen and natural phenomenon was thinner than we assume. When he describes a rain of worms in Saxony, scientists today recognize it as a documented case of tornadic fauna lofting, where small animals get swept into storms and dropped miles away. Perhaps the book's most haunting legacy is how it reflects the human need to find meaning in chaos. For Lycosthenes, the 1500s, with their religious wars, New World discoveries, and collapsing feudal orders felt like the end times. His Chronicon was less about predicting doom than seeking reassurance that someone, even an angry god, was still steering the ship. In that sense, his Encyclopedia of the Strange isn't so different from our own era's obsession with pandemic models or climate change projections. The vocabulary changes, but the longing remains, to discern patterns in the storm, to believe the universe is speaking, even when we're not quite sure what it's saying. What seals the Chronicon's status as a forbidden text isn't censorship, but our own discomfort with its double vision. It forces us to confront how quickly today's science becomes tomorrow's superstition, and vice versa. 5 centuries from now, what artifacts of our own rationality will seem just as delightfully, terrifyingly archaic? The answer might be hiding in plain sight, waiting for some future scholar to dust it off and wonder why we ever thought we had it all figured out. Recent breakthroughs in analyzing the Rohonc Codex have shifted the conversation from whether it can be deciphered to what its symbols might reveal about belief systems we never knew existed. Researchers working with advanced spectral imaging have detected faint underdrawings beneath the ink, ghostly sketches suggesting the illustrations weren't just decorative, but carefully planned ritual diagrams. One recurring motif shows a figure with outstretched arms, flanked by what could be celestial bodies or spiritual emanations. To some scholars, this echoes early Christian depictions of the crucifixion, but with distortions that defy orthodox iconography. The hands aren't nailed, they're open in blessing. The cross might actually be a stylized tree. These subtle deviations hint that the Codex wasn't just poorly copied Christian imagery, but a deliberate reimagining of sacred concepts by a community operating outside mainstream doctrine. The most provocative theory comes from a team at Budapest University who have identified clusters of symbols that repeat near illustrations of communal meals and ritual baths. When mapped against known heretical movements like the Bogomils or Paulicians' dualist sects that rejected church hierarchy, the patterns align with descriptions of their clandestine ceremonies. A sequence showing a dove descending toward a chalice might represent a spiritual baptism, while a series of interconnected circles could symbolize their belief in divine sparks trapped in material creation. If correct, this would place the Codex's origins in the shadowy world of medieval heresies, where persecuted groups often encoded their teachings to avoid detection. The very strangeness of the script, then, wouldn't be a cipher at all. but a liturgical language developed by a community that needed to write without being understood by outsiders. Yet other researchers argue the Codex points to something even more extraordinary, a faith tradition with no clear ties to any major religion. Hungarian linguist Catalin Olmoszi has noted that certain symbol combinations bear uncanny resemblance to runes used by the Shakely people of Transylvania, an ethnic group with possible ties to the ancient Huns. Pair this with illustrations of warriors wearing horned helmets and what appears to be a solar chariot, and you have a tapestry of imagery that feels more pagan than Christian. The Codex might be a rare survivor from a syncretic belief system that blended local animism with imported doctrines, creating a spiritual hybrid too unorthodox for any established power to tolerate. What makes these competing theories so compelling is how they reflect the Codex's physical journey. The vellum pages show signs of multiple repairs, suggesting it was handled with care across generations. Some stains could be candle wax from nighttime readings, while others might trace to hurried concealments, perhaps buried in clay jars or hidden behind altar stones during purges. The book's survival implies it held profound significance for its keepers, worth risking death to preserve. Whether it encoded heretical Christian rites, a lost Eurasian shamanism, or something entirely beyond our current frameworks, one thing becomes clear: this wasn't just a book. It was someone's sacred anchor, a thread connecting them to truths they feared might otherwise vanish from the world. The ultimate irony: in their desperation to keep these teachings secret, the Codex's creators may have succeeded too well. Their careful encryption, meant to shield the message from enemies, now shields it even from those who would revere it. The very act of preservation has rendered the text mute, leaving us to wonder whether some doors stay locked not because we lack the key, but because the people who held it chose to take its secrets to the grave. And so the Rohonc Codex endures not as a puzzle to solve, but as a testament to how fiercely humans will fight to remember, even when history tries its hardest to make them forget. The Sibyl's lost leaves whisper to us from the edges of history, scraps of vellum tucked into prayer books, lines of verse scribbled in the margins of agricultural manuals, even a single prophecy etched onto a lead tablet and tossed into a well. These fragments, scattered across Europe like breadcrumbs left by a fleeing oracle, suggest a terrifying possibility. The complete Sibylline prophecies weren't just destroyed, they were systematically dismembered. A page here, a verse there, enough to tease their power, but never enough to reconstruct their full vision. What secrets were so dangerous that even shattering them wasn't sufficient? The answer may lie in the way these remnants pulse with apocalyptic urgency, speaking of empires collapsing, like sand castures before the tide, and a crown of 7 stars falling into the sea. One of the most revealing fragments surfaced in a Swiss monastery in 1912, sewn into the binding of a 15th century tax ledger. The Latin hexameters describe a ruler with the voice of a lion and the heart of a hare who would sow the wind and reap the whirlwind. Historians immediately recognized the style as authentically Sibylline, echoing the cryptic cadence of prophecies quoted by Roman historians. But here's what chills the blood. This fragment dates from the 6th century, long after the original Sibylline books were burned by General Stilicho. Someone had preserved, or perhaps recreated, these verses centuries later, only to hide them again. The monastery's records show the ledger was purchased from a Venetian merchant who specialized in recycled parchments, hinting at how these texts slipped through the cracks of history, disguised as scrap material. The prophecy's survival strategy becomes even clearer when examining their distribution. Unlike other forbidden texts concentrated in heretic strongholds, Sibylline fragments appear in bewildering variety. A Greek verse tucked into an Egyptian mummy's wrappings, a Coptic translation hidden beneath a fresco in Cappadocia, even a Norse rune stone in Sweden bearing a distorted but recognizable line about the serpent eating its own tail. This geographic spread suggests a coordinated effort not to erase the prophecies, but to decentralize them, ensuring no single authority could monopolize their power. After all, a prophecy controlled is a prophecy neutered. By scattering the leaves, their keepers made certain the Sibyl's voice could never be fully silenced. What makes these fragments truly unsettling is their unnerving accuracy in hindsight. A 10th century Slavic parchment warns of iron birds that drink black blood, interpreted by some as a premonition of steam engines or warplanes. Another, preserved in a Jewish geniza in Cairo, speaks of nations bound by invisible threads, a phrase that now reads like prophecy of the internet. Of course, the human brain excels at pattern recognition. We project meaning onto vague phrases after events occur, but the sheer consistency with which rulers feared these texts suggests they contained something more specific than generic doom-mongering. The Byzantine Emperor Leo III allegedly had a complete copy burned in 726 after one verse seemingly predicted his own reign's collapse. What did he read that frightened him so? The most compelling theory comes from palimpsest studies at the Vatican Library. Multispectral imaging has revealed erased Sibylline verses beneath a 9th century chronicle, including a passage about the shepherd who would wield a sword of parchment. Some scholars connect this to the rise of literate monarchs like Charlemagne, whose legal reforms destabilized the old oral traditions of kingship. If the Sibylline books truly anticipated such societal shifts, their suppression makes brutal sense. Imagine a medieval ruler's terror upon reading what amounted to a spoiler for his dynasty's fall. Power thrives on uncertainty, prophecy dissolves it, yet the fragment's greatest power lies not in what they predict, but in how they mirror our own age of information fragmentation. Like algorithms feeding us disjointed glimpses of larger truths, these scattered leaves offer just enough to unsettle, never enough to illuminate. They remind us that censorship isn't always about destruction, sometimes it's about disorientation, leaving us clutching puzzle pieces we can never fully assemble. And in that sense, the Sibyl's voice still speaks, not through the prophecies that survived, but through the haunting gaps between them. For 600 years, the Voynich Manuscript has guarded its secrets behind layers of impenetrable script and bizarre illustrations. But now, cutting-edge technology is peeling back those layers one by one. Advanced multispectral imaging, originally developed to recover faded Renaissance paintings, has uncovered something astonishing: faint, erased notes scribbled in the margins of several pages. These ghostly annotations, invisible to the naked eye, appear in a different hand than the main text, suggesting they were added by a later reader attempting and failing to decipher the book's contents. But here's where things get even more intriguing. Some annotations contain what look like transliterations of Voinish symbols into medieval Latin characters. It's as if someone centuries ago came tantalizingly close to cracking the code, only for their breakthroughs to be scrubbed away by time. The annotations fall into three puzzling categories. The first group consists of single letters written above certain Voinish symbols, possibly someone's attempt to match the script to a known alphabet. The second includes brief Latin phrases like verba miranda, words to be wondered at next to particularly dense passages. But it's the third type that has researchers holding their breath: numerals in Arabic script tucked beside botanical illustrations, as if cataloging plants by some hidden system. Could these numbers be a Rosetta Stone for understanding the manuscript's classification scheme? Linguists are divided. Some argue they're proof the text follows a logical structure, while others counter that they could be random additions from a curious owner. What makes these marginalia so electrifying isn't just their content, but their timing. Carbon dating places the manuscript's vellum between 1404 and 1438, but the erased notes were likely added decades or even centuries later. This narrows the window for when the book might have been partially understood before slipping back into obscurity. Forensic analysis of the ink reveals iron gall, the standard medieval recipe, but with trace elements pointing to a Central European origin. This aligns with theories that the manuscript passed through the hands of Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II, an obsessive collector of occult curiosities who employed teams of cryptographers to unlock its secrets. Did one of them make these annotations before the trail went cold? The technological arms race to decode the Voinish is accelerating. In 2021, researchers at the University of Alberta trained an AI to analyze the script's patterns, concluding it likely encodes a real language rather than being random gibberish. Now, with these marginal notes as a potential key, teams are employing neural networks to cross-reference every stroke with known medieval cipher systems. Early attempts focus on the annotation's numeral sequences, testing whether they correspond to page numbers, alchemical formulas, or even astrological coordinates. One tantalizing hypothesis suggests the numbers might represent a book cipher, where they point to specific words in another text, perhaps a Bible or herbal compendium, that could unlock the meaning. Yet for all this progress, the manuscript retains its aura of defiance. The marginal notes are fragmentary, their context lost to history. Some pages bear stains where entire sections may have been deliberately washed away, leaving researchers to wonder, were these annotations part of a failed decoding attempt, or were they themselves part of the original encryption, red herrings meant to mislead? The Voinish seems to thrive on these paradoxes, revealing just enough to keep us chasing shadows. As one cryptographer put it, this book doesn't just resist interpretation, it toys with it. Perhaps the greatest revelation lies in what these ghostly annotations represent, a chain of human fascination stretching across centuries. From Rudolph's cryptographers to modern AI labs, the Voinish has drawn in generations of seekers, each leaving their faint marks on its pages. The notes are more than clues, they're a palimpsest of obsession, proof that some mysteries refuse to stay solved. And in that sense, the real secret of the Voinish manuscript may not be its content, but its uncanny ability to mirror our own relentless need to know. Beneath the watchful eyes of kings and inquisitors, an invisible network of scholars, mystics, and rebels kept dangerous ideas alive through sheer ingenuity. The alchemical underground wasn't just a collection of secretive men hunched over bubbling flasks. It was a sprawling, decentralized library where knowledge migrated from parchment to memory, from ink to symbolism, adapting to survive. Consider the case of Basil Valentine, a 15th-century monk whose writings on antimony were so controversial, he allegedly encoded them in a series of illustrated riddles. One recipe for a medicinal elixir appears as a knight battling a dragon, the dragon's blood representing the toxic byproducts of distillation. To the uninitiated, it was pious allegory. To fellow adepts, it was a precise laboratory manual. This tradition of steganography, hiding messages in plain sight, reached dazzling complexity in Renaissance Europe. Alchemists like Michael Mayer published lavishly illustrated emblem books where every detail, from the number of petals on a rose to the posture of a mythological figure, carried coded meaning. His Atalanta Fugians features 50 engraved images paired with musical scores, creating a triple-layered puzzle where art, music, and poetry all concealed chemical processes. Why go to such lengths? Because in 1617, the year of its publication, the Catholic Church had just sentenced the alchemist Marco Antonio de Dominis to death for heresy. When knowledge is punishable by burning, the wise speak in symbols. Oral transmission formed the other lifeline of forbidden wisdom. In the lavender-scented gardens of Medici, Florence, Neoplatonist circles practiced the Prisca Theologia, the belief that ancient truth survived through whispered chains of initiates. They weren't entirely wrong. The Corpus Hermeticum, a foundation of Western esotericism, had been preserved for centuries by Byzantine monks who memorized passages before the originals crumbled. Similarly, Jewish Kabbalists developed the Masorah, a system where each student orally verified the exact pronunciation and interpretation of sacred texts with their teacher before passing it forward. This wasn't just about accuracy, it was about creating living vessels for ideas too volatile to commit to paper. The resilience of these networks shines through in their most unlikely success stories. When the Spanish crown ordered the destruction of indigenous Mayan codices in the 1600s, Franciscan friar Diego de Landa recorded with smug satisfaction that he'd burned 27 diabolical books. Yet today, descendants in Guatemala still recite fragments of the Popol Vuh from memory, their oral versions matching glyphic passages in surviving fragments. Across the Atlantic, West African griots preserved astronomical lore through generations of song, knowledge that later helped enslaved navigators steer toward freedom using star patterns their oppressors couldn't decipher. What makes these methods so extraordinary is their adaptability. In 18th century France, Enlightenment radicals facing censorship printed philosophical tracts disguised as pornography. Knowing authorities would dismiss the books as smut rather than scrutinize their subversive footnotes. A century later, Russian nihilists communicated through chess games in public parks, each move corresponding to letters in a cipher system, the common thread. When direct transmission becomes impossible, knowledge shape shifts into art, into ritual, into the very fabric of daily life. Perhaps the most poignant testament to this underground river of wisdom lies in its imperfections. Unlike static manuscripts, orally transmitted knowledge morphs with each retelling, accumulating errors but also unexpected innovations. The alchemical motto, solve et coagula, dissolve and reconstitute, might as well describe the process itself. Texts fragmented, merged, and re-emerged in new forms, like the way medieval Arabic alchemy resurfaced in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales as cryptic references to the Philosopher's Stone. These weren't corruptions, but adaptations, proof that ideas, when pressured, don't vanish. They evolve. Today, digital encryption and decentralized blockchain ledgers echo these ancient strategies, reminding us that the impulse to protect knowledge from erasure is as old as civilization itself. The alchemical underground's true legacy isn't in the specifics of antimony or the Philosopher's Stone, but in its demonstration that no monopoly on truth lasts forever. Given enough time, even the most carefully guarded secrets have a way of seeping through the cracks, finding new custodians, and waiting patiently for the moment when the world is ready to hear them again. And in that unbroken chain of whispers, symbols, and stolen glances across forbidden libraries, we see humanity's most defiant trait, the refusal to let curiosity be extinguished. Beneath the Vatican's hallowed halls, past the tourist-thronged galleries and gilded chapels, lies a place few have ever seen, the Archivum Secretum, or secret archives. This heavily guarded labyrinth isn't just a repository of old papers. It's a time capsule of censored history, where shelves stretch for miles under the weight of documents deemed too explosive for public eyes. Among its rumored treasures, the Liber Lintius, that Etruscan text wrapped around an Egyptian mummy, but also darker relics, papal trial records for heresy cases, encrypted reports on exorcisms, and even whispered accounts of celestial phenomena observed by medieval monks. The Vatican insists only a fraction remains restricted, but historians note curious gaps in the catalogue, entire centuries where inventories mysteriously skip from letter to Bishop A directly to treatise on virtue B, leaving one to wonder what explosive correspondence might have vanished in between. Then there's the legendary library of Ivan the Terrible, a collection said to rival the lost Alexandrian archives. According to 16th century diplomats, the Russian Tsar hoarded priceless Greek and Roman manuscripts looted from Constantinople, including Aristotle's lost dialogues and uncensored histories of early Christianity. But after his death in 1584, the library vanished without a trace. Some believe it's walled up beneath the Kremlin, its entrance concealed behind Stalin-era renovations. Others claim it was smuggled to the Siberian wilderness, hidden beneath the ruins of a remote monastery. The most tantalizing clue surfaced in 1918, when Bolshevik soldiers reportedly found a secret chamber under Moscow's Kitai-Gorod district empty, except for a single oak chest containing a scrap of parchment with the words, "As above, so below," in Church Slavonic. Was this a fragment of Hermes Trismegistus's lost works, or a red herring left by a later occultist? The truth remains buried, quite literally, under layers of politics and paranoia. These hidden archives share a chilling commonality. They're often protected by more than just locks. The Vatican's archives require a special petition just to request access to a single document, vetted by a committee that includes theologians and canon lawyers. Meanwhile, explorers who have searched for Ivan's library tell of bizarre setbacks, equipment failures, sudden illnesses, and one account of a researcher who claimed to hear ghostly chanting in a tunnel before the walls collapsed behind him. Whether supernatural or simply the work of human sabotage, the pattern is clear. Some doors seem determined to stay shut, yet the allure isn't just about what's hidden, it's about why. Consider the fate of the Mayan Dresden Codex, nearly burned as devilry before being saved by a single curious scholar. How many other texts faced no such reprieve? The forbidden libraries force us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Knowledge has always been weaponized, and the line between preservation and suppression often depends on who holds the keys. Perhaps the most poignant example lies in Timbuktu's desert manuscripts, where families have guarded ancient Islamic and scientific texts for generations, burying them in sand to escape colonial purges. These aren't just books, they're acts of defiance, proof that even without vaults or armed guards, knowledge finds a way to endure. The forbidden libraries remind us that every sealed archive is also a question, not just what's inside, but who gets to decide we shouldn't know. And in that question lingers the real power of the undiscovered, the power to rewrite history, or better yet, to finally tell it whole. Imagine holding a manuscript so faded, so damaged that its words vanished centuries ago, then watching them reappear letter by letter under the glow of ultraviolet light. This isn't science fiction, it's the cutting edge of digital archaeology, where technologies like multispectral imaging are performing miracles on parchment. Take the case of the Archimedes Palimpsest. In 2008, scientists at Stanford's SLAC National Accelerator Laboratory bombarded its pages with X-rays, causing trace iron particles from the original ink to fluoresce. Suddenly, beneath layers of medieval prayers, long-lost theorems emerged, mathematical insights scribbled by Archimedes himself in the 3rd century BCE, overwritten and forgotten until physics pulled them back from oblivion. But the real game changer lies in how artificial intelligence is revolutionizing these discoveries. Traditional spectral imaging requires painstaking manual adjustments to isolate different ink layers, a process that can take months for a single page. Now, machine learning algorithms like those developed by the Lazarus Project can analyze thousands of spectral images in minutes, teasing apart overlapping texts with superhuman precision. At Oxford's Bodleian Library, an AI trained on known scribble handwriting styles recently reconstructed missing passages from fire-damaged Renaissance manuscripts by predicting how individual letters would have been formed. The system isn't just filling gaps, it's time traveling through pen strokes, recognizing quirks like a scribe's habit of elongating certain vowels or the way their nib split under pressure. Some of the most astonishing recoveries come from texts everyone assumed were blank. The Villa of the Papyri in Herculaneum, a Roman library buried by Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE, yielded hundreds of carbonized scrolls too brittle to unroll. For centuries, they were dismissed as unreadable ash. Then, in 2016, a team from the University of Kentucky used a particle accelerator to scan them with subatomic precision. The resulting 3D maps revealed Greek philosophical texts previously unknown to history, including a lost work by Seneca the Elder. Now, neural networks are decoding these scans by detecting nearly invisible ink variations caused by ancient carbon-based ink's interaction with the papyrus fibers. It's like listening for whispers in a hurricane, and the AI is learning to lean in closer. Yet these breakthroughs raise provocative questions about the limits of digital resurrection. When researchers at the University of Notre Dame applied AI to reconstruct damaged Dead Sea Scroll fragments, the algorithm identified plausible letter sequences, but were these true recoveries or sophisticated guesses? The line between restoration and invention grows thin when dealing with texts where no complete reference exists. And what happens when we apply this to deliberately erased histories? At the University of Pennsylvania, forensic linguists are using similar technology to recover censored passages from Soviet-era dissident writings, where NKVD officers scraped away ink with razor blades. Even the faintest impressions left in the paper fibers can now betray what the censors tried to destroy. The implications stretch beyond academia. In 2023, a collaboration between Google's AI division and the British Library recovered lost recipes from an 18th-century cookbook stained beyond recognition by a flood. The recipes, including a forgotten ginger-infused mead, were recreated by a London brewery and served at a history festival. This isn't just about rediscovering the past, it's about reliving it, tasting flavors silenced by time. As these technologies advance, they promise to rewrite entire chapters of history. Projects like the Venice Time Machine aim to digitize and reconstruct every document from 1,000 years of Venetian archives, not just the surviving ones, but fragments thought lost to damp, worms, or intentional purges. Soon, we may read letters from the wives of Renaissance artists, trade ledgers exposing hidden economic networks, or heretical tracts burned by the Inquisition. The digital age isn't just preserving history, it's resurrecting voices that were meant to stay silent, proving that no erasure is truly permanent when light and algorithms know where to look. And in that unearthing, we're reminded that every generation believes it has the final word, only for the next to uncover what was written beneath. There's a chilling paradox at the heart of manuscript discovery. The more we learn, the more we're forced to ask, should we? Take the case of the Icelandic Galdrabok, a 17th-century grimoire filled with spells to summon spirits and curse enemies. When it was first translated in the 1990s, several researchers reported bizarre mishaps, equipment failures, sudden illnesses, even a fire that destroyed a historian's notes. Coincidence, perhaps, but it raises an unsettling question. What if some texts were hidden not just to protect power structures, but to protect us? This isn't just about superstition. Consider the Voynich Codex, a Mayan manuscript repatriated to Guatemala in 2021 after decades in a private collection. local elders refused to let scholars examine it, insisting its astronomical prophecies were meant only for trained daykeepers. To publish its contents, they argued, would be like broadcasting sacred hymns as elevator music, technically possible, but spiritually violent. Their stance forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. The right to access doesn't always equal the right to understand. The dilemma grows even thornier with culturally sensitive material. In Australia, the Jarragun papers, a cache of 19th-century Aboriginal initiation rituals, sparked outrage when digitized without community consent. For elders, these weren't mere historical records, but living knowledge bound by strict protocols. As one custodian put it, "You wouldn't post your grandmother's medical records online. Why should our sacred laws be any different?" The incident led museums worldwide to adopt contextual embargoes, where access hinges on ongoing dialogue with descendant communities rather than academic credentials alone. Yet the opposite extreme, wholesale suppression, carries its own dangers. The Voynich Manuscript was nearly locked away permanently in the 1950s by a collector who feared its contents might unsettle modern science. Imagine if Galileo's writings had met the same fate. Knowledge once lost rarely returns. The challenge lies in distinguishing between protection and paternalism, between shielding people from harm and denying them the tools to grow. Perhaps the most nuanced approach comes from the Nag Hammadi cache, those Gnostic Gospels found in an Egyptian jar in 1945. Scholars worked with Coptic Christian leaders to create tiered access, translations for the public, high-resolution scans for researchers, and sensitive passages discussed only with monastic advisors. It's a model that acknowledges complexity, that some truths aren't secrets but responsibilities. In the end, these manuscripts hold up a mirror to our own biases. The same societies that once burned heretical texts now grapple with their own forms of censorship, whether through copyright laws, algorithmic suppression, or the quiet silencing of inconvenient histories. The ethical question isn't just what we can uncover, but what we're willing to reckon with, because the past isn't a passive artifact, it's a conversation, one that demands we listen as much as we speak. And sometimes the most profound act of preservation isn't revealing a secret, but knowing when to let it stay hidden. These 26 manuscripts aren't just relics gathering dust in forgotten archives. They're time capsules of human thought, each one a crack in the foundation of what we think we know about history. From the Voynich Manuscript's uncrackable code to the Popol V's defiant survival, these texts remind us that the past isn't a fixed narrative, but a battleground of competing truths. Every erased margin, every hastily burned prophecy, every symbol deliberately obscured speaks to the same relentless tension: the struggle between those who seek to control knowledge and those who risk everything to preserve it. What makes these manuscripts so electrifying isn't just their age or their strangeness, it's the way they force us to confront the gaps in our understanding. Take the Ripley scrolls with their alchemical riddles masquerading as fantasy art. For centuries, scholars dismissed them as the ramblings of medieval mystics. But modern chemists have found startling parallels between their imagery and real chemical reactions, suggesting they might encode practical laboratory techniques behind layers of symbolism. It's a pattern we see again and again. What one era dismisses as superstition, another recognizes as sophisticated science. Then there's the darker thread running through these stories, the deliberate erasures. The Sibylline books weren't just lost to time, they were burned because their prophecies threatened imperial power. The Gospel of Judas was buried because it undermined theological orthodoxy. Even the humble Liber Lintius, that Etruscan text wrapped around an Egyptian mummy, survived only by accident, its sacred words nearly reduced to bandages. These aren't random acts of decay, they're evidence of how actively history has been curated, redacted, and rewritten by those with the power to do so. Yet for every act of suppression, there's a counter-story of resilience. The Dresden Codex dodged Diego de Landa's bonfires by sheer luck, preserving Mayan astronomy that still stuns scientists today. The Ora Linda book, whether hoax or misunderstood relic, refuses to stop challenging our assumptions about ancient gender roles. Even the Rohonc Codex, with its undeciphered script and heretical artwork, lingers like a ghost at history's feast, taunting us with questions we can't yet answer. This brings us to the most thrilling possibility of all, the manuscripts we haven't found yet. For every Codex Gigas or Archimedes Palimpsest that resurfaces, how many others remain hidden in private vaults, buried in ruins, or even mislabeled in plain sight? The recent discovery of a lost Aristotle treatise in a Sinai monastery library proves that earth-shaking finds can still happen. And with technologies like multispectral imaging and AI-assisted translation, we're entering a golden age of rediscovery, where even the faintest ink traces can be resurrected. So as we close this chapter, here's the real takeaway. History isn't a static record. It's a living, breathing thing, reshaped with every recovered fragment. These 26 manuscripts are proof that the past is always ready to surprise us, to contradict our assumptions, and to reveal new truths when we least expect them. The next breakthrough might be tucked inside an unassuming prayer book or waiting in some overlooked archive, and when it comes to light, it could rewrite everything we thought we knew again. What's your favorite mystery from today's list? Have you ever stumbled upon a piece of history that made you see the past differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you're as obsessed with these untold stories as I am, don't forget to hit subscribe, because trust me, this journey into the shadows of history, it's only just